Thank you, Rachel and Angela, for that really incredible conversation. How are you guys feeling? Good. So our next panel is called Familiar Touch, the Creative Process. And it is, Familiar Touch is one of the Creation Prize finalists that we have in the festival this year, written and directed by Sarah Friedland. So the film is a beautiful and poignant story about an 80-year-old woman who comes of old age. She's adjusting to her new life in a retirement home. And our conversation between me and Sarah today will focus on the film's creation, Sarah's artistic process, and then filmmaking as a space for community and connection. So please welcome to the stage, Sarah Friedland. Okay. Hello, Sarah. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
I'm really happy that you're here. So something that really fascinates me is the title of films' names. We're going to get into the creative process, but your film is called Familiar Touch, and I'm wondering where that comes from and what that means for you.
I mean, it comes from a few places. My background it's in filmmaking, but it's also in dance making. I studied to be a choreographer, and so I often approach storytelling as a way of sort of writing the movement of bodies. And this film also comes out of my history as a caregiver as well. I worked as a caregiver for about 4 years. And I'm assuming most people haven't seen the film, but our character is struggling with memory loss, but rather than being a narrative of decline or disappearance, as I think many films about older adults are, it's largely about her continuity of self. And one of the things I learned as a memory caregiver is that older adults who experience memory loss, their other senses are often intensified. So even as their cognition shifts, their sense of touch, taste, smell, their kind of proprioception, all of that for many people can be sort of amplified. And so I wanted to really locate our character in her body rather than her sense of self just being a cognitive function. So there's that, the kind of locating the film in her body and her senses. But then also there's without giving too much away, there's kind of a play on familiarity in the film of how the relationships of family and paid caregivers, how we relate to those people might, the clarity of that might shift with age, but a feeling of familiarity, of intimacy can still pervade that kind of blurriness.
That's very interesting. So you are a choreographer as well as a filmmaker, and I'm wondering about how your choreography practice informs your writing and directing practice.
Yeah, I mean, the writing, like I write in screenplay format so that my colleagues can understand it, but I think I often think about it as a movement score and will often kind of write out sort of how a character is moving through space and translate it into a script format. But for me, I think about screenwriting as like a way of writing movement. And I'll say studying dance was the thing that helped me most in preparing to direct, because choreography, it's really a way of sort of patterning bodies in space and time. And I think about the bodies of my crew members just as much as sort of performers in that. So for me, it's really helpful to sort of scout a space with my DP. And I've been lucky to work with the same DP, Gabe Elder, for 10 years. We made all of our shorts together, video installations, and imagine, okay, if the performer is walking here and the camera operator is on a dolly here, and sort of think about it kind of choreographically, like the blocking of sort of where is the microphone, where is the camera, where is the actor. I don't think I'd be able to do that had I not studied dance. So yeah, I'm showing up as a director, but I'm thinking as a choreographer when I'm on set.
So when an idea comes to you, where does it come from? Do you see movement and then you're writing that out and then, like you said, translating it into script form?
Yeah, it's hard. I don't know. How do ideas come? They come somehow. They're lucky when they do. Yeah, I think I'm like very much a note taker. Like I'm always kind of scribbling, and I'm a diagrammatic thinker. So I can't draw in 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions to save my life, but I draw like football plays. So like camera operators here, I'll draw like little X's. So yeah, it's hard to say how the ideas come, but then usually movement and then diagrams is how I process them. Yeah.
And so then sort of carrying on with the choreography, when you're working with actors, how does that work when you're developing a character for them? You're very focused on how the character is moving in space. How are you also developing the character's like emotional awareness and reality?
Yeah, I mean, this was a big leap for me because before Familiar Touch is my first feature film, and before making this film, I had only made I'd made dance films and video installations, primarily working with dancers and non-professional actors. And so Familiar Touch, and I'd worked with 2 professional actors before, both of whom were dear, dear friends. And Familiar Touch, all of a sudden, we were casting, brilliant actors who I didn't know, and was absolutely terrified because I knew how to give direction in terms of movement and embodiment, but I had never built characters before with a performer. And so I was very lucky in that the actors I had worked with agreed to practice with me in the months leading up, and we would pick random scenes from films we loved and rehearse the scenes so that I could work on kind of how to communicate character intention and emotion rather than movement. That said, I was very lucky in that the lead actress of our film, Kathleen Chalfant, who you'll get to hear from later today, she has a long history working with choreographers. So she's been in a lot of Yvonne Rainer's films, Pam Tanowitz, some of our sort of great choreographers she's worked with. And so we actually discovered that we had this shared language, and I didn't have to use an entirely different skill set to work with her. We could talk about her character and her character's emotional journey through her body and through her movement. So I guess just to give one example, there's a scene that we cut from the film, but talking about that scene sort of set everything into motion for us, where when her character first gets to this care facility, there's a brand new toothbrush sitting on the bathroom sink that she doesn't recognize. And we talked for like a half hour on set. We were driving her AD crazy about exactly the gesture of, would she place the toothbrush down as if she hadn't seen it? Would she discard it as if it had registered with her and she was deciding it could not be a part of her material reality? Would it be somewhere in between? And we spent all this time talking about this act of refusal with this toothbrush and exactly how she would place the toothbrush down. And we decided so much about her character in picking that gesture. And it was liberating for me because I realized, I actually can work with actors through physicality, and maybe that's my language as a director. And to find an actor as incredible as Kathy who wanted to work that way was awesome. Yeah.
So how do you choose your collaborators, from actors to editors to cinematographers? How do you choose who you work with?
I've been very fortunate in that my core creative team has been the same. I met my DP and production designer when we were all PAs, and we started making shorts together. And now 10 years later, we all made the jump to a first feature together. So that was sort of a kind of being in the trenches and coming up together, and we're in it for life now. In terms of actors, I worked with the casting director, and it was really kind of a gut thing of you meet someone and you sort of kind of know. I mean, that's how it was with Kathy. We spent years looking for the right actor, and we met, and it just was that, like, we just knew.
So you worked with a lot of non-actors as well on this film. And in fact, you made this film with the staff and residents of Villa Gardens Retirement Community, which is an actual retirement community in Pasadena, California. So they were your cast and your crew. Can you talk about what that was like?
Yeah. It was amazing. I mean, as I mentioned, I was a caregiver for 4 years, and then that work led to teaching filmmaking workshops for older adults and making intergenerational films. And so in telling this coming of old age story, we really knew that it needed to be made not only in collaboration with older adults, but in collaboration with care workers. And so it took a long time to find a care community that was interested in having this exchange. But the idea was that I wanted to integrate all of these ways I'd been working. So what we proposed to Villa Gardens was that myself, my crew, and some of our cast would come in 5 weeks before we started filming and teach a filmmaking workshop for the residents. And so basically twice a week we would meet and they would learn every aspect of filmmaking from writing to editing. And once the first day of each week, a different department head or actor would lead a workshop on their craft. And then the second day of each week, they would shoot their own short films and everyone rotated crew roles. So if you were writing one week, you were directing the next, acting the next. And so by the end of 5 weeks, not only did the whole community know our whole crew, but all of the older adults there discovered what their interests were. A lot of people came in thinking they wanted to be actors and left deciding that they were actually cinematographers, etc. And so by the end of the 5 weeks, everybody signed up for the department they wanted to be in. So some people performed, but we had everyone, residents joined every department, I think, except the grip department, but otherwise there was participation across all of them. I think there would have been room for an octogenarian grip, but there wasn't the desire. But the benefit, it meant that people really consented to participating in the way that they wanted to. Also, for us, it allowed us 5 weeks to really study the rhythms of this retirement community. And so we knew all of the staff, we knew the meal times, we knew, this is when people are tired, this is when if we're in this space, we're going to disrupt the care work happening. And so we got to craft a schedule then that matched the rhythm of life there. And the care workers also, we got to know them very well. And so a lot of the care workers in the film are real staff there who became interested in acting. And so it meant, I think, for us that the story was, there's more authenticity, but also our crew learned so much from everybody there. And yeah, it was wonderful to see people discover their love for other elements of filmmaking, not just acting. There's one woman who fell in love with production design and sourced all of the art that you see on the walls in the film from residents who lived there, just to give one example. So it was beautiful to have this sort of confluence of making a film that's meant to honor older adults and caregivers, and then to get to learn from them while we were there.
So is this part of your process? Do you sort of incorporate real communities into your filmmaking practice? And if not, is this something that you would do again? Because when you guys all go and see the film tomorrow, you can really sense how lived in it feels and how authentic it feels when you're watching the film. So when I, watched the film and then I read that it was, made in collaboration with this community, I was very impressed. But then also, because it felt so natural, I wasn't surprised.
Yeah, I think when I first started filmmaking, I didn't go into it thinking, I'm going to make films in this way. And it came out of becoming a teaching artist. I became a teaching artist to support myself, and that collaborative process of being an educator really made me realize that I could combine these things. But I definitely want to do it again. And I think it also comes from me from dancing, the joy of being with a group of people that you're all together in one room, and just wanting to make films with dancers sort of led to wanting to make films with other types of communities. So definitely want to continue working in that way.
And because this is your first feature, like we said, and you're at the earlier part of your filmmaking career, can you talk about building a sustainable practice? because you are an interdisciplinary artist and you have these different forms that come together in one project, how do you sustain that? How do you sustain yourself as a person, and then as an artist, and then as a director, you're the lead. So how do you make sure that the overall process of making the film is sustainable and sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Just affirming for the rest of your cast and crew?
I mean, in terms of the sustainability, for me, I'm still working on it. I don't think I've found a good balance. My freelance work has been all over the place, and I'm still trying to make the pieces fit. In terms of sustainability for a cast and crew, I think it meant, I mean, two things. One was sustainability in material ways. So we had pay equity on set because we were working with a micro budget. Our DP made the same amount as our set PA, and everybody agreed to the same wage. And that was sort of how we made sure that we could film this with this very small budget, but do it equitably. And then I think like emotional sustainability meant being very, very clear with everybody about why we were making this film, and hiring people who really wanted to work in collaboration with older adults and care workers, and understood that we were not only entering into a home, but a workplace with work that is very precarious work. And so I think if everybody's making the same film, and if everybody agrees to be there for the same reasons, and they're materially supported, I think that's how sustainability happens on a set.
And is that something that you envision carrying forward in your practice?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in terms of the pay structure, I think different films require different budgets in different ways, but certainly in terms of making sure that everybody is supported materially and emotionally and agrees that we're there for the same reasons. Yeah, absolutely.
And so I'm wondering, because you have done video art in the past, what made you want to make this into a narrative feature film as opposed to like a documentary or some other sort of video installation?
It's a great question. I think because the ideas I had for the character were so specific, I knew it had to be scripted. And I had long had the desire to make narrative films, but was scared of them. And thought that I didn't know how to do that. So I would say it was just, I mean, I wrote the first draft 10 years ago. So I wanted to make this before I made all of the video art. So I think it was just a long time coming, and knowing that the specificity of what this character is going through would require an extraordinary actor to pull off. And Kathleen Chalfant is an extraordinary actor. So I think it came from that need for a performer to realize this. I don't think the story I don't think I could have done it in those other forms.
And how, 10 years, how did it change from that first draft to that final draft? I'm sure that being a care worker yourself and just life experience helped to develop the script. But what's one thing that changed very significantly from that first draft to the last draft?
Well, it's interesting because the final film is closer to the first draft than it is to the final draft. The first draft, as I mentioned, I sort of write with movement in mind. The first draft really sort of imagined this woman's transition into a new home, and really just kind of traced her movements in like her home of many years for the last time, and then how she was moving around this new space and her interactions with care workers. And then as I tried to get the film off the ground, you know, I got lots of development notes. I went through some labs, and like, you know, there was an emphasis on plot and character development, these things that I had not been doing with my previous work that was more experimental. And so I developed the script that had, you know, arcs and subplots and all of these things. And then in the edit, it didn't need it. It just needed to return to this character and her movement in this through her new world. And so a lot of the editing process was kind of cutting out all of the script development. And so it's made me, I mean, we love script labs, but it's made me wary of script development. And that sometimes like the simplicity of the early kernel is actually where it is. And I mean, I'm very grateful that this is my first time working with professional editors. I've edited all my shorts and installations myself, and they emboldened me to just like get rid of all of these things that I spent 10 years writing, and to kind of go back to the original thrust of it. Yeah.
Sometimes that's the journey of things, and that is good that you know what works for you, and that you felt emboldened to let go of what maybe would make like a traditional film audience or traditional Hollywood happy to make the film that you wanted to make. And I think that, again, when you guys see the film, it really, really pays off. And it is also a film I want to mention that focuses, so the central character, Ruth, has dementia, but it's not focusing on loss so much as it's focusing on a transition, and how even as a person transitions into this experience that they're having, that they're still fully themselves. And that's not something that we get to see in these sorts of films. And we also don't get to see films like this that are completely rooted in the point of view of the person experiencing dementia. We're usually, with family members or friends who are on the outside looking in, losing someone. And so I want you to talk about why you chose that point of view, and is that where you started when you started writing the script?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the original inspiration for the film was my own grandmother. My grandma was a poetry editor and a very intellectual woman, and very sharp, not someone you could ever describe as cute. But she put so much sort of self-value in her linguistic expression. And when she became nonverbal, because of her dementia, my family, in processing their own grief, started talking about her as if she were no longer there, using the past tense, almost sort of preemptively mourning her. And yet when I would go and visit her at the memory care wing of the facility she was in, she was very physically expressive. And that gap between her sort of physical sense of self and the language we were using to describe her haunted me for years after her death. And then, I guess, cut to a decade later, I'd been working as an assistant and a coordinator, doing sort of every entry-level job you can do on a set, and reached a point where I felt like I wasn't really learning about people who didn't exist on set. That's when I started working as a caregiver, and the clients I had were mainly New York City artists and creatives. And so many of the people I worked for just did not resonate, like they weren't reflected in the depictions of older adults that I had seen. That they were, yes, they were going through this experience of cognitive decline, and I could see that their family members were going through what I'd seen my family members go through, this process of grieving. And yet the person themselves, they were often full of joy and sort of self-expression, and were trying to find the sort of through line of themselves and their lives, rather than having this experience of kind of degradation and disappearance that we usually see depicting older adults. And that, for me, it was just seeing that kind of continuity that really inspired this. And I started thinking about the coming of age genre, because with the coming of age genre, for younger adults, we see them going through these transitions, becoming a different person, yet we don't say they're no longer themselves, they're no longer there. We say they've come of age. And we don't allow that kind of continuity for older adults. So at the time, I had a first draft of the script, but I I started thinking about what tropes from the coming of age genre could I sort of, as a young person, borrow or steal to depict this experience of an older adult. Because as you said, we don't get to see older adults. I feel like there's these two poles. Either it's like, I won't name names of films, but there's like this sort of, it's a decline narrative of disappearance on the one end, and it almost has like the tropes of a horror film. It's like art house horror. And then on the other end, it's sort of old people say the darndest things, and the older adults are fabulous. They're just absolutely fabulous, and their bodies are perfect, and nothing is wrong. And isn't it cute that they're falling in love? And I feel like those are the two poles, and we don't see anything else. And so, or at least in American cinema, there's some great examples outside of American cinema of coming of old age films. So yeah.
And I'm wondering, this is a bit of a pivot, but it's a question I'm always interested in asking filmmakers, which is what you feel is the greatest potential of cinema.
I think it's projection. Like, there's the image being projected, but I think the best thing that happens with cinema is you get to sit there in a dark room, and whatever you are processing personally, politically, whatever, you get to throw that onto the film you're watching, and something comes back to you, and you get to have this whole experience of understanding your relationship to the world, and then you kind of come out the other end a different person. And I think I think it's those sort of like little intimate acts of projection between your body and the dark and the screen that happening en masse is extraordinary. And I think that could be processing a personal experience or something much broader. But the idea that like 1,000 people or 100 people could be in a room and doing their own act of projection at the same time, to think of that happening all over the world in dark rooms everywhere, it's pretty, like the accumulation of it's pretty awesome.
That's a beautiful response. And so I know you guys have not seen the film, but I invite you to ask any questions about the filmmaking process or about the directing process. Yes.
Since you wrote it and the choreographer, what was more painful for you, the script edit or the film edit, when you had to give up that line or that scene?
So the question is, as a choreographer, writer, and director, what was more painful, the script edits or the film edits?
The film edit, because the script edit, it's just my darlings, it's my words, whatever. But the film edit, it's actors, you know. And what was so hard was that the actors in these scenes that I was cutting, it wasn't because their performances weren't good. Their performances were fantastic. They honored exactly what we had, you know, built together. But the film didn't need it, and to me that was so hard because, you know, my initial instinct was to keep it in because, oh, this is a great performance. But the film, the kind of edit tells you don't need it. And it's so hard because you know that your colleague has done their best work and you want the world to see it. And, you know, I kind of wish I could show the world all of these great pieces of my colleagues' work, and I can't because, you know, that's not how it works. But yeah, it was very painful to cut that because, you know, when your colleagues do beautiful work, you want people to see it.
And yes. The question is, have the people at the care facility who made the film with Sarah seen the film, and what was their response?
They're seeing it in 2 weeks. It's premiering in LA at AFI at the Chinese Theater. So we've rented a bus to take all of the residents and caregivers to the Chinese Theater. We're going to do the whole red carpet experience. So I'll report back once that's happened. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to know about the sustainability of what you're doing. So I'd like to hear more about how we're going to sustain ourselves, you yourself, and the field.
So the question is about the sustainability of filmmaking for female filmmakers, both personally and then more broadly of all ages.
I mean, I think we need money. I think
That's my question.
I mean, I'll be honest, like, this is my first feature. Putting this film out in the world is like, that's about as much as my plate can handle for the next like 3 months or so. I'll say part of the process for us of distributing and releasing the film is I'm facilitating filmmaking workshops for older adults, including here at Mill Valley, where Angela and I are facilitating a workshop on Monday for older adults that I believe still has, there's some spots left. So if anybody would like to join, I think there just needs to be broad investment across the field in women and non-binary filmmakers of all ages. I think there needs to be money for everyone to do their work. So I hate to be so brass tacks about it, but I think that's what we all need, because we're working in a very resource intensive art form. You know, you can't just wake up every day and do it without, I mean, you can write, but you need people and resources. So I think my hope is that there's greater investment.
Oh, yes.
As a writer-director, I'm finding it hard to lock the script. Did you ever lock your script before you, because it just keeps changing for me?
Yeah.
So what did you do and how did you?
The question is about locking your script. So do you ever put the pen down? And if so, how did that happen?
Yeah, I did lock the script, partially for ethical reasons, which is that we were up against both the writers' strikes and the actors' strike, and I'm not in the WGA or the DGA yet. But even so, I didn't want to keep writing once the WGA strike was going on, so I locked it the eve of that strike. So that meant basically a month before we filmed that, like, in final, for those who aren't familiar with sort of screenwriting software, locking actually is a physical task that you can do. You press a button and it's like frozen. So I did. On set, you know, we had some moments of changing lines, but I actually found that sort of sticking to not overthinking it was helpful for me. And working with an actor like Kathleen was wonderfully supportive of not kind of second guessing what I had already decided on. There was one moment where I didn't like the line that I had written, and I was thinking of like rewriting it on the day. And she sort of turned to me and said, "You know, I met the screenwriter of this film, and I think she knows what she's doing, and maybe we should trust her." So yes, I did lock it, but then we would improvise moments on set. But I mean, it's so I feel what you're saying. It's such an anxious process. Yeah.
Yes.
And also the spiritual aspect of things that may happen on set, all those magical moments, and when it's finally finished, you know what that's been like for you.
So the question is about what it's like to carry a story for 10 years and then finally have that release, and the spiritual aspects of that, as well as the spiritual aspects of some of the magical things that happen on set.
I mean, honestly, being on set was the greatest gift, because by the time we got to set, it had been 9 years since I wrote the first draft. And it was dried out. I mean, there's so many other ideas at that point that I wanted to work on. Like, it felt like this thing that I had conceived of and had then grown a lot as an artist and wanted to think about other things. And so that's where working with actors felt spiritual in a way, because it just reanimated it. And this thing that felt like completely dried up became vivid. And so there's like, as you said, that kind of magic that occurs. And so it was really extraordinary to get to just sit at the monitor and witness something that I had almost kind of lost my own. It just felt like it had been. I'd just been like tugging at it for too long, and it just had lost some of its sort of freshness. So yeah, cast and the kind of active collaboration really kind of reanimated it. In terms of it being done and that moment, it hasn't happened yet. I'm a delayed reactions kind of person emotionally, and so I think we went there's like waiting to find your premiere, waiting to find all like there's so much rejection and anxiety in the process of finding the release into the world, and then right after that you go right into like the work of promoting a film. So to be totally frank with you, it's this 10 years have culminated, it hasn't happened yet.
So that's all the time that we have. But you can watch Familiar Touch tomorrow evening in San Rafael at 6:30. And then it has its second screening on the 7th. And you don't want to miss this film. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you for your thoughtful question.